Thank you, Dr. Christie. This is a wonderful opportunity to learn, to have a meaningful conversation, and also to discuss all the issues that are happening. Thank you very much. The first thing that we will do is that we will start with the land acknowledgement. That's very important for us. Thank you.
We acknowledge that the land on which we work on and live is the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of Celestial Peace. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Celestial Peace, Igmat, and Pasamahisi, the people's first signed with the British Crown in 1747. The treaties do not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognize Igmat and Celestial Peace and establish the rules for what was to be an unbroken relationship between nations.
Thank you very much.
So, good evening. I have to say thank you for the introduction. So that was very gracious. And I have a short anecdote before we start. So I was giving a talk one time in Montreal, and there was a lady at the talk who happened to work with my mother. And my mother was working in a place called Sioux-Lookout, which is in northern Ontario, and she was in charge of staffing the nursing stations for all the flying people. So this woman said to my mother, I heard this ethics talk, and my mother said, oh, that's my son. So the lady said, do you think you'll come here and do something with our nurses? And my mother said, yeah, he owes me a visit, so he will. So she told me when she'd like me to come, and she did the introduction for the talk. And this was humiliating. So she started off and she said, this is my son Timothy. You know, he barely graduated high school at Harrison Trimble in Moncton. The only program we could get him into was a BA at UNB. And he started studying medical ethics and no one knew what it was. And it went on and on and on. So it was so bad that when she said, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Christie, someone actually raised his hand and said, hey, you forgot to tell us when he took his first step. So this one, my brother, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And you folks, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I love meeting with groups like yourselves. Today we're going to talk a little bit about harm reduction. So, I don't know, if I can start at the beginning. Years and years and years ago, back in the 90s, wasn't it? I was working for the Chief Medical Health Officer. And that was at the time when we had to figure out what we're going to do with people that got HIV and Hep C through patient blood. So I was hired as an expert in informed consent to help the minister figure out who we're going to compensate in that next one. And at the time, there was a physician who had just retired, and they wanted to keep me around, but there wasn't enough work for an ethics person. So they asked me to do HIV prevention on behalf of the province. And that's when I got introduced to the ridiculous world of health policy when it came to HIV, Hep C, and now all the things we're doing now. So it's been an interest I've had for a long time. I'm from New Brunswick, so I grew up in Moncton, but I spent a lot of time working at a place called the Center for Excellence in HIV and AIDS in Vancouver. And we had 6,000 patients on HIV medication. And they were split almost two cohorts, right? There was the gay man cohort and the injection drug user cohort. Of course, there was lots of people that were both and that type of thing. But on the gay man side, by the end of the 90s, they had a really good handle on how to interrupt the spread of HIV amongst themselves. So, but the injection drug users side was a disaster. And it was so bad that we had to declare a public health emergency in the downtown east side of Vancouver because it was the biggest outbreak of HIV anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa at the time. And that meant we had to get very real about interrupting the spread of HIV amongst the drug-using population. So they hired me as the director of ethics to do all the ethics work on the harm reduction stuff. So we opened the supervised injection site, we ran the heroin prescription trials, we expanded access to methadone treatment, we had a decentralized needle exchange and that type of thing. And we were lucky because we had this old guy we worked for. His name was Michael Shaughnessy. And he was on a team of two people that figured out how to develop a highly active antiretroviral therapy for HIV disease. He was on the team that did that. So he's a renowned guy. So what he did was hire a bunch of us, and we were a lot younger then. And our job was to take scientific evidence and ram it down the throat of government in the most unapologetic way possible. And he took all the flak for us. So we were bulletproof. No one could touch us. I remember one time we were in a meeting, and the Minister of Health was there with the deputy, and we were talking about patients stuck in the hospital who needed to be placed in a nursing home, but there was no room for them. So they're stuck in the hospital. And we're talking about that, and the deputy said to the minister, if you empty those beds from these older people, you're going to fill up with sick people, and they're much more expensive. And so O'Shaughnessy said to the minister, he said, go outside and look up. It says this in the effing hospital. So the guy had the best, most incorrigible attitude possible when it came to speaking to authorities. So all of us really, really appreciated working for him at the time. So what I'm going to do today is just go through the process we did and talk about the evidence that everyone uses for this stuff. So my projector's over here, so I'm going to have to keep bumping into this one. All right. Conflicts of interest, I haven't. Oh, that's okay. Oh, yeah, you can do it if you want. Not yet. So I have no conflicts of interest. I work for universities and the health authority and that type of thing. So there's nowhere that I would see there's anything that would conflict with what I'm going to talk about today. The hospital made me give a disclaimer, so they say every time I open my mouth, they want me to say, I don't represent the opinions of the health authority or the hospital or the university. I don't know why, so I'll draw your attention to the last line of my disclaimer. I think it's a shame that these are not their attitudes and their opinions. All right, next slide, sir. So I think what we're going to do is go through evidence-based medicine, a little bit of the history of evidence-based medicine. Talk about some of the scientific evidence for harm reduction, a little bit about ethics, and then negligence. But I should say, this is your session, so if there's questions, comments, whatever, please ask me as we go through, and we can turn this into a discussion as opposed to a formal presentation. So my take-home message, this is the fundamental principle we use in medicine: do no harm. Non-maleficence, premium, don't correct. If you can't help or you can't fix a situation, then the idea is you don't want the doctor to make a choice. And I apply this to everything. So in public policy, healthcare funding, whatever it is, you might not be able to do everything. You might not be able to fix a problem or solve it or make it better. But we can certainly not make it worse. And if we look at our approach to drug use in North America in particular, our public policies make it worse. So it's not like our response is neutral or beneficial, it's actually counterproductive. So I would say, whenever in doubt, whatever situation you find yourself in, say, if I can't fix it, at least I don't have to make it worse. So that's my take on it. So, I want to give an example of what I mean by not making it worse, non-maleficence, and evidence-based medicine. So this is a study, and it's called multi-center randomized placebo-controlled double-blind study of nitric oxide synthase inhibitor. So multiple center, that means lots of places where we're doing it. Randomized means that people just randomized either to nitric oxide inhibition or placebo. Placebo-controlled means you give some people the active inhibitor, and some people an inert substance. And double-blind means neither the doctor or the patient will ever get, or the person reviewing the information. Now, this was a very serious study because one of the leading causes of death in the intensive care unit is septic shock. And everybody with septic shock has low blood pressure. And everybody with low blood pressure have elevated levels of nitric oxide. So the hypothesis was if we can interrupt the production of nitric oxide, we might interrupt that causal chain, prevent people dying from septic shock and ICU. So when the researchers went to the Research Ethics Board and said, we want to give some people placebo and some people nitric oxide inhibition, they said, whoa, you gotta be crazy. You're gonna, people are at risk for dying and you're gonna give them a sugar pill? You cannot do that. It's unethical. And the researchers, to their credit, fought and fought and fought, and they eventually got the study approved. And the next slide, Sarah, please. And what they found is that they defined survival as 28 days, and the study had to be stopped because after they reviewed the data by the independent data safety monitoring group, they found that nitric oxide inhibition was killing people. And in fact, it was better to give up. So in the placebo arm, 49% of the patients died. In the nitric oxide inhibition arm, 59% of the patients died. So that's a 10% difference. So 10% of 259 people is 26, right? 26 people died because we did something that made it worse, and we didn't know. So the point is, so the point is, if we can't help, don't make it worse. And this gives us conclusive evidence from a scientific perspective that what we were doing was making it worse. The challenge now would be to give people that say fund the war on drugs, how much evidence do you need to see that what you're doing is making it worse? And in that, war on drugs has killed many more than 26 people. Is that okay? So it's just an idea of how important this idea of harm is. Next slide, please. So I want to go through the history of evidence-based medicine a little bit, just so that we understand the importance of using evidence when reason about things, even emotionally charged topics, even emotionally laden topics, even topics we have strongly held beliefs about. I think evidence will matter in a sense. So this is a first quotation from the first randomized control trial. So this guy said, I qualified for medicine in 1937. New treatments were always introduced on the grounds that in the hands of Professor A or in the hands of consultant of those in teaching hospitals, the results of a small series of patients had been superior to those of someone else. So this is what we would call medicine based on the authority of the doctor. Right? If you believe in your doctor, you have faith in the doctor, you have trust in the doctor, you want to get the best one that you can. But this isn't science, so next slide, please. So the first randomized control trial we had was on streptomycin for treating pulmonary TB in 1948. And next slide, please. You can take your picture first.
No, it's okay. Can I get a copy of this?
Of course. All right, so this is the story of John Snow. And he's the guru of epidemiology. And what happened was in the 1850s, there was a cholera outbreak in London. And the Registrar General, his name was William Clark, he thought that cholera was caused by bad air. And John Snow said, no, I think it's from contaminated water. But the Registrar General had all the power. He had the office and the power to implement the policy. So next slide, please. So what Snow did to prove his theory is he went walking through London and he went to each house and he said, where do you get your water from? And he said, he checked with water to see where they got it, if it was upstream of the Thames or downstream. So next slide, please. So this is the result of this study. If you got your water from Southwark Company, which was downstream of the Thames, the death rate was 315 people per 10,000 households. If you got your water from Lambeth Company, which was upstream of the Thames, your death rate was 38 people, 38 deaths per 10,000 households. Does this mean that there was no one that got the water from upstream that died of cholera? No, some did, right? tell us that water is strongly implicated. So what should a public figure do in the face of such data? If they're true scientists, they would abandon their strongly held belief that it's caused by bad air and say, well, it looks like water is implicated. Doesn't mean that no one getting water from here doesn't die. I don't know, maybe they drank it out of friend's house, who knows? But we have pretty overwhelming evidence that one approach is better than the other. Even though this doesn't prove anything about water, does it? It just proves that where you get your water from matters. Next slide, please. This guy, Ignaz Semmelweis, he believed that doctors were vectors for puerperal fever, which was killing newborns. So in the hospital he worked in, he found that if you were delivered by a midwife, the infant mortality rate was 12 deaths per 1,000. But if you were delivered by a doctor, the infant mortality rate was 90 deaths per 1,000. So he said, I think what's happening is the doctors are all over the hospital seeing all these people touching them, and their hands are dirty. So he instituted hand washing outside of the labor and delivery theater. And when he did that, go ahead, sir, next slide. So when he did it, originally it was 90 to 12. When he did it, put in hand washing, that number dropped to 90. Or to 12, sorry, the same number as midwives. So once again, would this be compelling evidence that it's important to wash your hands before baby? So what would a rational hospital administrator do when they face such evidence? Tell people to wash their hands, right? What do you think his hospital administrator did? Fired him. They fired him. They fired him. He had a nervous breakdown and died in some insane asylum. Next slide, please. And at this time, what they thought is that you fight fire with fire. So if someone has gun trouble, you would cauterize them. And here he says, he ran out of cauterization. So he said, at length, my oil lock I was constrained to apply in this place a digester made of goats and eggs, oil of roses and turpentine. That night I could not sleep at my ease, fearing that by lack of cauterization, I would find the wound upon which I had not used the said oil, dead from the poison. I raised myself in order to visit them, but beyond my hope. Next slide, please. I found those to whom I applied that digestive medicament, feeling but little pain. Their wounds neither swollen nor inflamed, and having slept through the night. The others to whom I had applied the oil were feverish with much pain and swelling of their wounds. Then I determined never again to burn thus so cruelly before. And wounded. So this was a mistake. This was he ran out of the cauterization stuff, but what was the standard of care? What was the routine medical practice for people at this time? There was cauterization. And through just happenstance, he runs out of it, and what did he find? It's better to do nothing than to do something that you don't understand. Next slide, please. And then this study is why British are called limeys, and Germans are called krauts. Sauerkraut and citrus. So here he said he was a surgeon on a Navy vessel for the British Empire. He said, I took 12 patients on the scurvy on board the Salisbury at sea. The cases were as similar as I could have them, and they lay together in one place and had one diet common to all. 2 of these were ordered quart of cider per day. 2 others took 25 grams of elixir vitriol. 2 others took 2 spoonfuls of vinegar, and 2 were put under a course of seawater. And 2 others had oranges and 1 lemon given to them each day. 2 others took the bigness of nutmeg. The most sudden and visible good effects were perceived from those who used the use of oranges and lemons. One of those who had taken them being, at the end of 6 days, fit for duty. The other was appointed nurse to the rest of the sick. So this is a randomized control trial, isn't it? He took, made them as similar as he could, and only changed their diet, and as a result, he found this. So is this biological or chemistry proof that how oranges prevents scurvy? Not at all. But once again, this is the implication. All right. So 50 years after the Lynn study, they put lemons on ships. And 30 years after sunlight, his findings were accepted. And for some reason, hand washing in hospitals today is still problematic. We don't have compliance with it. And the next slide, please. And this is a little bit more modern. This is a review. How long does it take for something that's clinically proven, scientifically, to make it into medicine, become a standard of care? And the answer is about 17 years. Just go back one more. Or that's okay, stand that slide, that's fine too. So 17 years. So I'd like to think about that for a moment. How on earth could it take us 17 years to do something we know friggin' works? We know it works. The science is there. The evidence is there. How can it take us 17 years to do it? And that's why I study ethics. It is pure, it's mental variables. It's obstacles in people's minds. It's people in authority that have something other than the best interest of the people they're serving at heart. It's something in them. So I don't know if it would be conflict of interest, I don't know if it would be prejudice, I don't know if it would be bigotry. But what in the world can do this? And I think this is unforgivable. So if it was my child that needed something, or my child that dies of drug overdose, and we know how to prevent it, I'd be living. As I think most of us are. All right, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Let me just explain this one. So basically, in science, we don't accept a hypothesis. So I don't say it's true that water causes cholera. Yeah. I don't say that it's true that water causes cholera, but I have no reason to reject that hypothesis right now. I failed to reject it. So we don't accept the hypothesis. We either reject it or fail to reject it. And failure to reject a hypothesis doesn't mean that it's true. However, it does represent the best understanding we have to do. And science improves when we're proven wrong. So each of us in a policy position or in a position of authority should be looking for ways to be proven wrong, not to confirm our biases about right, correct, and true in an infallible way. Next slide, please. Is that okay so far? Okay, so now that's just the basis of evidence-based medicine, and the rest of what we're going to do is talk about evidence trying to look at drug use. So this is a paper published in March 2023 in The Lancet. It's by this guy, Benedict Fisher, and he says the continuous opioid death crisis in Canada, changing characteristics and implications for path options forward. And in this paper, he says, we discovered that we were in thralls of an overdose epidemic in 2016. And at that time, we called it crisis. And people jumped up and down and did things, but we're still in a crisis. So he calls it a continuing crisis. So you can see here, from 2016 to present, over 30,000 people have died of overdoses in Canada. That number's even higher. But I just want you to hold in your mind for a second this low number of 30,000. This is what we call a crisis. Okay? Next slide, please. 2017, remember a whale got caught in a trap somewhere? This is the headline. Here's why 12 right whales died in Canadian waters, and why more will die if nothing is done. And then let me read this. All eyes on the Canadian government after a catastrophic year for highly endangered species. 12 whales is catastrophic. And 30,000 people. You like whales, sir?
Well, I just want to point out that the whales are part of the invasion.
Yes, I
More than
understand
a humans.
that. I understand that. So maybe that explains it. But the point I want to say is that with this, we shut down the fishery. We made it so no one was doing anything in the Bay of Fundy until they found that whale and figured out how to get the nets off. So granted, it is an endangered species, but look at the intolerance we had for such a thing. And look at the tolerance we have for 30,000 ducks. Right?
One of is dying every 4 days. That's how much we said that.
And that's not catastrophic, a preventable death. All right, so anyways, that's kind of the point I want to make is how is it that we could accept that? And I remember when I was younger, we had the tsunami that went through Southeast Asia. And I wrote a paper that was published in Developing World Bioethics that said, boy, if you died from a tsunami, the international contribution was $35,000 per death. At the time, avian flu was coming out. If you died from avian flu, the international contribution was $12 million per death. But if you died of HIV in Africa, the international contribution was less than $1,200 per death. And if it was civil war in Congo, it was $15 per death. So once again, I said, you know, these are all people dying of preventable deaths. What is the rationale that the international community uses for allocating funding? Here, I don't want to make too much of it, but I do think that we are at catastrophic levels with the opioid overdose. It's not a continuing crisis. Not that I disagree with Benedict, but next slide, please. Is that okay so far? Am I speaking loud enough? Can you guys in the back here? Is anyone melting yet? My wife is here, and she hates it when it gets this hot. So I will ply her with alcohol after. All right, so this is a conclusive picture for me. This is what happens if someone has an overdose behind a dumpster in a corner somewhere. People find them dead. The alternative is if they inject in a supervised injection site and they drop an overdose, they'll be resuscitated. So if it was your child that had an addiction problem, or your spouse, or your mother, or your father, where do you want them to do their bad habit? Here or here? It's obvious to me. And with 30,000 of these events over a couple of years, or one every 4 days here in Brunswick, right? Is that St. John or New Brunswick? New Brunswick. Yeah. Next slide, please. So I want to try to define harm reduction for you. Nobody's going to agree on a definition. So I'm using mine. So this is a paper I published a couple of years ago in the International Journal of Drug Policy. And here's how we define it. We said the fundamental assumption of harm reduction, which is the primary focus of this paper, is that it's important to try to reduce drug-related harm. So it's possible to prevent the overdose even though they continue to use drugs. It's possible to prevent the HIV infection even though they continue to use drugs. That, for some reason, challenges people for their intuitions and really, really pushes the boundaries of what they're willing to accept, because they say, no, I want them to stop using drugs. It's better. They won't get hurt. They won't get HIV. They won't have an overdose if they stop. And that's where, as a person that works in ethics, I say, okay, let's talk about that. What's the rational basis here for your insistence? And then I try to use the concept of the trade-off, right? If you value getting people off drugs, the trade-off is you're going to accept that they're going to get HIV or die of an overdose or have symptoms. And how can your love for abstinence be more important than love for preventing preventable deaths? So it's a concept that's really, really challenging, and it's hard. It's been years and years and years that this has been around, and it's still not universally accepted, although the scientific evidence for it is conclusive. Next slide. So, exchange, supervised injection sites, supervised consumption sites. So this is an important distinction. And this is going to drive people crazy again, because most people dying of overdoses in Canada now are inhaling, not necessarily injecting. But all of our smoke-free world policies, right? It's going to be very, very difficult. It's easy for someone, say, to be in a hospital and for us to tolerate them injecting release drugs into their body in the hospital. But man, they would lose their mind if someone was trying to smoke something in the hospital. They'd light a lighter, and it would be the end of the world apparently. But this is going to be the next challenge is smoking, I think, is becoming more prevalent and more connected to overdose than injecting. And then, of course, some of these other approaches. So what we're going to talk about today is immuno-exchange, supervised injection, consumption, heroin prescription, and naloxone prescription. So, supervised injection sites. This was published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. It's a systematic review published in 2021. So a systematic review is the highest standard of evidence we have. So how can that be? How can it be the highest standard? Because it is a systematic review of all of the studies in the literature. So to publish a systematic review, you have to prove to the peer reviewers and the editors that you've looked at everything out there. You can't miss anything. And if there's a study not included in your review, you have to give an explanation. So this is not just saying, here's my study, and arguing about it. This is a systematic review. It is the highest level we have because it combines all of the studies we have. So they said here, a total of 22 studies were included in this review. 16 focused on one supervised injection facility in Vancouver, Canada. The quantitative synthesis was not conducted given inconsistent outcome measurement across the studies. Supervised injection facilities and included studies, any number of studies per category, were mostly associated with significant reduction in opioid overdose, morbidity and mortality, significant improvements in injection behaviors and harm reduction, significant improvements in access to addiction treatment, and no increase or reductions in drug and health uses. So what did this systematic review tell us? You can prevent people from dying, you can prevent people from getting infections, you can increase referrals to treatment, and there's no downside. So it hasn't increased drug use, it hasn't increased crime, it hasn't increased public nuisance, there's no downside to it. Next slide, please.
No increases or reductions in crime or public nuisance, it just stays the same.
So they said for people who inject drugs, supervised injection facilities may reduce the risk of overdose, morbidity, mortality, and improve access to care, while not increasing crime or public nuisance to extravagant. And try to open a supervised injection site and hear how many people say, great idea, but not in my backyard. And I remember the rigmarole we had with the first one in Vancouver. Neighborhoods were boycotting us. It was really, really serious, the opposition we had for that. So I don't think anyone can read this, but I'll read it to you. But here's just some of the individual studies. So I gave you the systematic review. But the first study says that the supervised injection site attracted those users who were formerly most likely to inject in public and be at highest risk of HIV infection with overdose death. And this is published in the American Journal of Public Health. The opening of Insight was followed by statistically significant reductions in public drug use and publicly discarded syringes. Canadian Medical Association Europe. Use of Insight's been associated with reduced syringe sharing and other forms of risk behavior, published in the Lancet, the top journal of medicine. Insight's also been a key referral mechanism to addiction treatment and other related resources, including abstinence-based programs, published in drug and alcohol dependency. And Insight's opening has not been associated with increased drug use or other drug problems, published in the British Medical Journal, the second most important journal. Next slide. So in Canada, we have 39 sites now. From 2017, they've supervised 4.1 million injections. They have on average 3,000 visits a day. There's been 47,000 overdose events, with 340,000 unique individuals, and with 0 deaths. So these numbers are better than John Snow's, aren't they? He couldn't get 0 for cholera. Given this, how many people died of an overdose? Over 30,000. What should the number be?
0.
And it's still not a catastrophe. But the evidence, the science is conclusive. So I'm not saying if we over-supervise injection sites, we will eliminate people dying of overdoses. But I am saying people using that site are not going to die of overdose. So at least people will have a choice, because some people might want to take a risk for reasons that we don't understand, but they need the alternative. So 4.17 million injections, no deaths. What's the alternative? Well, if you look at the number of injections happening in Canada right now, it's 20 deaths a day. Deaths a day. No overdoses. Yeah. If they're under medical supervision, some people, like I heard the other day, there was someone that they had to give Narcan to like 7 times. But Narcan's were overdoses. But people inject everything in the supervised injection site, not just opiates, and whatever they overdose from, because lots of overdoses are polysubstances, and we don't resuscitate everyone. Next slide, please. CADA is the Canadian Association for Drug and Technology and Health Assessments. So they're the people that the federal government go to when they say, there's something new, we don't understand it, can you figure it out for us? So they would be almost the equivalent of Center for Disease Control or something like that, like Canada. And they wanted to look at needle exchange. So needle exchange, basically the hypothesis for needle exchange is if you inject with a clean needle, you're not going to get HIV or Hep C. If you inject with a used one, you don't know what's on it. And that's what drove the HIV epidemic amongst drug users, sharing of needles. So the idea was, can we give you a clean needle exchange? So when I was in Vancouver, we had the biggest needle exchange in North America. We were giving out 3.5 million needles a year. And we had the biggest HIV outbreak outside of Sub-Saharan Africa. So what do you think George Bush and his friends did? They started publishing, paying scientists to publish papers in the scientific literature saying needle exchange is not enough. They said, look at Vancouver, they have the biggest needle exchange, and they have the biggest HIV problem. So obviously needle exchange isn't enough. So I was hired to figure out this paradox that we had. How can we have this huge HIV outbreak and this huge needle exchange? So what I did was I looked at the data and did an analysis, and the street scene had changed from a heroin scene to a crack cocaine scene. So crack was introduced. So what happened is we went from a person injecting 3 or 4 times a day to a person injecting maybe 2 or 3 times an hour. Hour after hour after hour. So the number of injections in the downtown east side went from 3.5 million to 12. So in that gap is where the HIV outbreak came. So the needle exchange, the biggest one in North America, the way they sold themselves was to placate the community. So they sold themselves as a community benefit and community partner. And they said to the community, we're going to protect you and your kids from dirty needles in the community. So we're going to get back more needles than we give out. So year after year, they had 105% return rate. So they took in more needles than they gave out. The community loved this, right? Because they thought it made them safer. And to do that, though, they had to have a policy that it was a one-for-one policy. So if I bring you a needle, you'll give me a needle. If I bring you 10, you'll give me 10. But I can't show up empty-handed and say, give me 10 needles. Or I can't say, I'm going to lock myself away and bang all weekend with drugs. I need 50 needles. They would say we can't do that because we have to protect our return rate, because that's what the community wants. But remember, the injection frequency went from 3.5 million to 12 million overnight with the introduction of crack. And they're holding on to their policy because of all these fragile community relationships they have. Now, in the face of the evidence, injection frequency has gone up in an HIV outbreak. What should they do with their policy?
Dump it.
What do you think they did?
Cancel it.
They fought tooth and nail for it. And the only way we could change that policy is I actually had to take their funding away and fund 30 different organizations to do the same amount of work that would follow the policy, because they just wouldn't do it. And once again, the evidence was clear. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the results from the CADD review. There's overall evidence that needle exchange programs and safe injection sites are effective at reducing prevalence and new infections of HIV and Hep C among injection drug users in the community. Implementation of the supervised injection site did not increase the number of people using drugs in the community, but it was associated with reductions of overdose-related morbidity and mortality, general drug-related harms, injecting on the streets, and littering in public places with used injection paraphernalia. And in addition, needle exchange and supervised injection sites were found to be cost-effective, and injection drug users who use them are more accepting of drug dependence care, including referrals to addiction treatment centers, detox programs, and opiate substitution programs. Next slide. So that gives us conclusive proof about the effectiveness of supervised injection sites and the effectiveness of needle exchange. Now we'll get into the North American Opiate Medication Initiative. This is NIOMA. It's the heroin prescription trial. And this trial was where we hypothesized and said, what would happen if we relieve people of the need to engage in drug-seeking behavior every day? So what is one of the hallmarks in the diagnostic criteria for addiction? Drug-seeking behavior. Right? So what is drug-seeking behavior? Well, this is where you have to earn money. You have to get the money to buy your drugs. So if you can't afford them personally, you might sell your body, you might commit theft, you might break into something, you might steal something, but you'll do whatever you have to earn, to get the money to buy your drugs. The literature says that untreated person with addiction costs about $45,000. So if you're using a modest number, say $100 a day to have it, how much is that a year? $36,500. That's just if you have $100 a day habit. The habit can be a lot more than $100 a day. Now, that doesn't include arresting someone. It doesn't include treating them for an endocarditis. It doesn't include the ambulance rides to the hospital, all of those things. Right? So we said, well, what if people don't have to engage in drug-seeking behavior? We'll give them heroin 3 times a day. They can come to our clinic and inject heroin for free 3 times a day. The eligibility criteria would be in a study where you have to be the hardest of the hard to treat. You have to be in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and you have to have failed methadone twice. And if you fail methadone twice, you can be eligible for our study. And we randomize people to either methadone, which they failed twice, or heroin. And what we found is that by relieving the need to engage in drug-seeking behavior, what was the obvious reduction? Yeah, exactly. There was a huge reduction in crime. Why? Because the people didn't commit crimes to buy their drugs. In addition to that, they stayed in treatment longer. And just as a side note, when this study was first published, Julie and I were in Los Angeles, and I was presenting the results from the Uptown Clinic, and these guys were presenting their retention rate of 75%. And And in the same study, we presented ours, and ours was 95%. And this was for a mental health study. So it's kind of fun that we were in the same session. But anyways, what they showed is that you can reduce crime, and you can keep people engaged in treatment when you do this. That's 45,000 in social costs in criminal activity that is no longer in our community for each person who received this. In addition to that, there were some other weird things that happened. We had a group of people who were now too busy to get high. Because they weren't hustling all day. They started getting productive. They got their kids back, they're taking courses, some of them had jobs, job interviews, lots of stuff. So they came to us and said, I can't do these things when I'm high, so can I switch over to the methadone? So we had a significant number of people switch over to methadone. But remember, they failed methadone twice before they get into the study. So it blew us all away. None of us had expected that result. But once again, all the harm reduction people say you have to meet people where they are. When we met them where they are, they were able to get their own stuff together, right? Once they got stabilized on whatever they were doing, they became very good. Another thing that happened in that study was we knew that the government's never going to authorize heroin, no matter what we do, no matter where we publish these things, we do this. So we had a subset of people in the study that we gave injectable Dilaudid to. And it was blinded, so the patient didn't know they were getting Dilaudid, and they had the same outcomes. So the next study, if we go to the next one, was the Solomon study, which is a study to assess long-term opiate medication initiatives, effectiveness, Solomon. And this is the Dilaudid study to Dilaudid arm, and we found the same results. We go to the next slide. And all of this is a New England Journal of Medicine, but here you say the results of the groundbreaking Solomon research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association show chronic heroin addiction now has another effective treatment tool, hydromorphone, a licensed pain medication. Solomon was spent to a study of access to long-term opiate medication effectiveness. Now, hydromorphone can be as effective as diacetylmorphone, which is heroin, for people who have not benefited from previous treatments. So now, people that don't do well on methadone, we have another effective treatment. And like I said, these are published in the leading journals. So next slide, please. So what do we know? We know that needle exchange programs reduce risk of HIV and Hep C infections, they increase referrals to treatment, and they're cost effective. We know heroin and Dilaudid that we can retain people in treatment, we can reduce illegal drug use, we can reduce illegal activity. And next slide, please. So what do we know from the harm reduction and intervention that we've gone through? We know how to prevent deaths, prevent infections, retain people in treatment, increase referrals for treatment, reduce illegal behaviors, and to do all of this without increasing